The Carnegie Library, it's probably one of the most beloved historical buildings in Pipestone. We get a lot of comments about that building here at the museum. So actually the public library moved out of the building in 1976, little background. It found use as a senior center from 1977 to 2020 when that organization moved out. And then they moved out due to some of the building's structural concerns. Without an obvious use of the building, the financial burden of upkeep and repair on the building has been questioned. But of all of Pipestone's amazing historic buildings, this is the one that seems to be held most dear to people's hearts, the Carnegie Library. According to, just some background on Carnegie libraries, according to a 1989 article in the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, 63 libraries, Carnegie libraries, were donated in Minnesota. In 1989, the time of that article, only 38 of them were still used as libraries. 12 of them at that time had been torn down, and that was 35 years ago. And no one is really keeping track of these buildings today. I think we sort of take having a Carnegie Library for granted today, but being awarded funding from the Carnegie Foundation in 1903 specifically for the construction of a public library building was a big deal. And being fortunate to still have that building today is a very big deal. So we're gonna look into this further here. So Andrew Carnegie was a Scottish-born American businessman. He was an industrialist. He made his fortune with Carnegie Steel Corporation, although he was also into several other endeavors, and he acquired a huge amount of wealth, even by today's standards, really. But he was also a serious philanthropist. Besides his support of libraries, he also paid for thousands of church organs, which I hadn't heard of before until I looked into this. And he most noticeably established a number of focused trusts. A number of those are still around today. He was so serious about his philanthropy. He was married in 1887, and his wife signed a prenup acknowledging that he intended to give his fortune away before his death. He wanted to go out having it all spent. So the Carnegie Libraries, between 1883 and 1929, the Carnegie Foundation supported the building of 2,500 libraries, both public libraries and university libraries. And this was actually worldwide. However, the focus was really in the United States. So in 1920, of the 3,500 existing libraries in the United States, fully half of them were Carnegie libraries. So, Pipestone heard about this opportunity to get some funding for a library building, and the Pipestone Community Club took the lead on pursuing a Carnegie Library. Actually, Morris Evans was the correspondent. And in 1902, Pipestone reached out to Andrew Carnegie inquiring about his library donation program. And by that time, Carnegie really had his process down. So when a request came in from a community, a questionnaire was sent out. So we have the questionnaire here. This is just a couple of pages from the questionnaire, which I was able to find online. And I meant to look up again where exactly this is housed, and I forgot to do that. It is in a I believe it's a university library collection, has these Carnegie grant applications, and they're microfilmed, and they are available for free online to look through. So I looked up Pipestones, and it was very interesting. So of course, the town, Pipestone, Minnesota, the population, that's just kind of fun right up here. We wrote down 3,000 for our population, and then there's a notation there that said, well, the 1900 census said 2,500, so they corrected that on there. Does it have a library? Yes, we already have a library. Where is it housed? A room in City Hall. That's this building. And the amount of rent paid. Didn't pay any rent. Amount of taxes paid by the community yearly in support of the library, $500. Amount of taxes guaranteed by the city if the library is built, $1,000. Is there a site ready? Yes, there is. The amount you now have in hand already collected for this project, none. So the Carnegie formula, he really required public support and a financial commitment for the maintenance and operation of the library. So his requirements were to demonstrate the need for a public library. The community would provide a building site. The city would guarantee that they would have paid staff and that they would maintain the building. Carnegie wanted to make sure that the public funds were used to run the library, not donations. So that the city was required to annually provide 10% of the construction cost in support of the operation of the library. And he really emphasized that it would provide free service to everybody. So, Pipestone went to work to secure a location. There's lots in the newspaper about this. They were discussing many locations, and mostly they're really difficult to pinpoint today. They were largely referred to by owners, their owners' names, so one would really need to comb the land records to figure out where these properties might have been located. One identifiable location was the courthouse square. Well, we know where that is, but that was discarded because of the belief it would detract from the beauty of the courthouse square. The newspapers also, they're identifying the properties like Cutting Corner and a piece of land in Sanford's addition offered by Dr. W.J. Taylor. Well, we'd have to go look into that further. But what was decided was the Scarf site. And we do know where that was because now it has a Carnegie Library on it. The corner of Hiawatha Avenue and 3rd Street Southeast. Oh, jumping around. Okay, so $10,000 is what Pipestone was awarded, and that was a huge grant for the era. Today, I Googled that out today, that was a grant for $870,000. Pipestone hired Sioux Falls architect Joseph Schwartz. He had also been the architect on the high school building, and that is the one that burned before Central High School was built. And generally speaking, with Carnegie Library grants, the community got to choose the architectural style of the building. That was not Carnegie's concern of what the building really looked like. They were typically simple, formal, usually with prominent doorways via a staircase from ground level, which we've got that right here. That's a symbol of a person's elevation by learning. Often there was a light post near the entrance, which was a symbol of enlightenment. And there isn't one in the early pictures, but the later pictures, there's a light post down there. So check that out. However, he wasn't concerned with the exterior so much as the interior. He had specific requirements for this. He required a lecture room. He required a reading room for adults and a reading room for children. A staff room, a centrally located librarian's desk, 12 to 15-foot ceilings with large windows. And we, definitely have that here. Fireplaces were discouraged. And there were absolutely no strict furniture requirements. However, at that time, most of the library furniture came from the Library Bureau, which was a company that sold standardized chairs, tables, catalogs, bookshelves, things like that. So he did require his funded libraries to practice a revolutionary new open shelf self-service policy. So in that, patrons had access to the shelves themselves. You could go look for your own book, just like the old grocery stores. Instead of taking your request to the librarian's desk and they going into the stacks to get your book for you, you're able to go yourself. And that actually helped reduce operating costs because, of course, they needed less staff to do that. He did also require a library circulation desk placed just inside the front door. At that time, these library circulation desks, they were bigger, kind of more daunting, very physical piece of furniture there that really kind of created both a physical barrier and also a psychological barrier. And that was basically their security at that time. This is my favorite picture of the building. I guess the sun is shining on it and you can really see it. So, of course, the Carnegie Library building in Pipestone is located at the corner of Hiawatha Avenue and 3rd Street Southeast. It faces Hiawatha Avenue. So it is 2 stories. That's including a raised basement level right here. A gable roof. It is constructed of dark red Sioux quartzite from, quote, the old Poorbaugh quarry north of town. And that is both the foundation and the wall of the building. It has both double hung here and single hung windows, sash windows. And there are stone lintels of gray-pink Sioux quartzite here. Above the ground level windows. It's a very attractive building. Here's where I get into some of the architecture really. The primary exterior surfacing is broken ashlar facade of hand-hewn Sioux quartzite. And a belt, of course, a belt course of gray-pink Sioux quartzite that runs below the roof line and above the windows right there. So I also looked up ashlar so I could have a actual definition for you because you see that, at least here in Pipestone, repeatedly on architectural descriptions of our historic buildings. And ashlar is large, square, cut stones. That's why you see it a lot in our building descriptions. Broken ashlar is a form of stone masonry that deploys tooled ashlar blocks in horizontal courses consisting of varied bricks which within each same size course. So basically you could see that the size of the stone, they're different, but they're all the same in the same row. So that's broken ashlar, and we have a lot of that around here as well. Interestingly, in this is a great photo that I was able to find. I found in the original plans, it spoke of the ornamental crest on the building up here. It was actually cut in the original plans and then added back into the project. And it is zinc. It was zinc. You won't see it there now. 18 inches high. I mean, huge up there. And it makes the building very ornamental. So that was a surprise to notice that in some of the older pictures. So with the exception of the northeast corner, which is rounded, a very interesting feature of the building is rectangular, almost square, rectangular building. The entrance, it's neat to see this floor plan. This is a more modern floor plan. It's not the original floor plan, but I'm going to speak of some of these details, so we'll go back here. The entrance is articulated by a gable wall which projects from the front of the building, and it is defined by two centric pointed arches right there, constructed of gray-pink Sioux quartzite. It has a circular stained glass window above the door enclosed in the arch. That is still there, so make sure you go notice that because it's really quite a neat feature. And a raised relief panel depicting an open book is located on the front gable. That's up here. It's washed out in the picture. You can't see the book relief on there. It is still on the building. I bet it might have missed your eyes when you were looking there, but it's still there because this was built as the library. So located at both ends of the building and on top of the gable wall are projections of stepped parapets in gray-pink Sioux quartzite, and that we have right here and over there. Let's see. So this was something we found out in our research. In 1949-1950, there was extensive reconstruction of the foundation. J.M. Stager and Sons, local contractor, was hired to do the work. They announced it, and I'm getting this out of the newspaper. They announced it in September. The next headline found was in April, and it said, "Closed last October after the building was no longer safe." So at that time, in 1950, they put in new concrete footings, a general reinforcement of the walls and the roof. They reshingled the roof, probably took that zinc off of there at that time. New plaster throughout, new paint, new floors, new lighting system, new rooms partitioned in the basement, which we get into this, that's right there. That was done in the 50s. And a new heating system, and they even reseeded the lawn. Complete remodel at that time. The only picture that we have here that we can identify as the interior of this building as a library is this picture here. And you have to just kind of know what you're looking at, but this is definitely the Carnegie Library. After the remodel, they've put some new flooring in there. New modern lighting right there. Yeah, we don't have interior pictures of the library. This was the best I could find. So in 1974, the community library agreement between the public library and the Pipestone School District happened, and they merged into one space that was housed in Central School. And this is a picture of that space. They vacated the Carnegie Library the building at that time. So the library left the building in 1974. In 1977, there were renovations for a senior center. Architect Martha Farrell designed this remake of the building. So the twin community goals of this renovation were the preserving of the building and providing a good senior center. Now this was 1977. This was the height of urban renewal in this community. So the old jail, which sat on the courthouse lawn just south of the courthouse, it was demolished the same year the community decided to renovate the Carnegie building. This was a big discussion in our community at that time, and people felt very strongly about it. And I know that today we are awfully sorry to have lost a lot of the buildings that are no longer with us here in Pipestone. So in 1977, 200 area residents showed up at the city council meeting with an overall consensus to preserve the building and to pay for it by taxing the residents. People felt very strongly about it. And I got some quotes out of the newspaper, which are very interesting to hear, and I'll read a couple here. So Leon Ludolph said, "I think we've got to preserve a few of the older things. Are you going to knock everything down and put a plastic shed?" And Mrs. Floyd Prunty said, "Geology has given us a special gift. I would much rather go with this than one of these quickie new buildings." And we're so glad they decided to really put some effort into the preservation of these buildings. And they're important to the fabric of our community. In 1980, the building was placed on the National Register of Historic Places. So reading that application, it states that the Pipestone Library is one of the architecturally significant Carnegie libraries constructed in Minnesota. It reflects the local emphasis on education and the influence of the Carnegie Foundation in the construction of small town libraries. So as I mentioned, Joseph Schwartz of Sioux Falls designed the library building, and local builder George Redmond constructed the building. And they say in the application that the building is an important outlier of Pipestone's commercial historic district, which is also recognized by the National Register. It's our downtown district. So it also touted the successful adaptive use as a senior citizen center to ensure its preservation. In 2003, it was noticed that the north wall of the building was bowing outward. The building was closed at that time. The city pursued and received a state grant through the Minnesota Historical Society of $27,000, which was then matched by the city to repair the north wall, and Heineman Restoration of Del Rapids did the work. And if you look at that wall today, the north wall, you will notice that it is bowing. There is a definite bow in that wall, but there was extensive discussion on the repair at the time, and that was the recommended fix by the architect and the engineers, was to repair the wall but leave the bow in it. And so there we are today. It's not doing it again. It has been repaired. In 2019, the city pursued a condition assessment report, which was paid for by a $10,000 grant from the Minnesota Historical Society. And the objectives of the condition assessment were, there's four things. Their objectives were to determine the existing condition of the building, to identify and prioritize maintenance and repair needs, to identify and prioritize historic preservation needs, and to review building code compliance. And so LHB Architects of Minneapolis were hired for a complete architectural overview of the building. They found some very interesting things. The roof was in unacceptable condition. It was missing shingles, and there was observed water intrusion. They found significant masonry damage, particularly on the east facade. And they found that the windows were in poor to unacceptable condition. Now, I'd want to stress that this condition assessment is actually the first step that has to be done in doing any other work on the building. And these grant processes, they take years to get through. You do one thing at a time. So particularly with state money, they are going to require that you first have this assessment done so that everybody's on the same page about what work is necessary. And so that's what happened in 2019. In 2020, quote, chunks of Sioux quartzite fell out from the east wall. So that closed the building. The senior center moved out. That building had also housed on-site senior dining and Meals on Wheels. All of that moved out of the building in 2020. So this particular area on the east wall had been identified in the 2019 condition assessment, but it wasn't recognized as an immediate threat because you just don't know. So obviously, when this happens, water had gotten behind the stone, the freeze-thaw popped the stones out. And so this did happen in March when that type of activity would have been experienced. In 22, the city applied for and failed to receive a legacy grant through the Minnesota Historical Society for repairs to the building. I checked up on that with the Minnesota Historical Society, and in their legacy grants, we're actually competing statewide for preservation money. It's the state population asks for way more money than the state has to give during any one grant round. And I asked about this so that we can improve the grant for the next round. And looking through it, they basically said they ran out of money. So it wasn't that the state thought this wasn't a good project. It's that they didn't have enough money to give it out to everybody. So this project fell by the wayside. So after the city did not receive this grant, they then considered several options at that time, including selling the property into the private sector, which fortunately did not happen. In 2023, the city put their historic property improvement program on hold to focus on city-owned properties like the Carnegie Library. And in 2024, in June of last year, the city was granted a state capital county and local preservation grant for $122,162, and that is also through the Minnesota Historical Society, to repair the east wall. That is a 50-50 grant, meaning the community would pay for half. The grant will cover half. The project was to include the reconstruction of the east wall, installing new flashing, refurbishing the windows on the east wall, repairing the interior plaster on the east wall, repairing the rotten floor framing on the east wall. And that work, we thought at the time, would begin this spring. However, as I said, these grant processes are time-consuming and things come up. So the state has now come back and said, we actually want you to address a few of these other requirements. They're looking at the total building plan, basically. So the city, to my understanding, has gone back to kind of assess the project, and hopefully they can move forward on the work. But that is the situation with the building. So really, work is being done behind the scenes in the preservation of this building. It's just that these grants take a long time and it seems like nothing's happening. And we know that firsthand from the historical Pipestone County Historical Society's work on the Ferris Grand Block, the historic preservation of that. So we got set back a year because we ended up missing a deadline due to the project not being wrapped up when we thought it would be. So then we weren't able to apply for the grant to just go right into the second phase. So we're back a year. It doesn't mean we're not working on that building anymore. We're still writing the grants, lining up the funding, and it'll be done in the future. We're still working on that. But Pipestone has some really unique historic buildings in this community, and they're really part of the fabric of this community. And hopefully we can keep them all around for the future instead of just losing them with apathy. We can't afford it, we can't afford it. Well, you never can afford it. You just break up the projects piece by piece and keep working towards it. And the Pipestone County Historical Society owns 5 historic buildings. We can't afford it either. But we'll just keep working with that. And I hope, with you being here, you'll be advocates for historic preservation and using these buildings on into the future. Thank you. Yes.
Do they have a use for the building when it is fixed up?
I think there's always a use for a building. I haven't heard any particulars, but it seems to me if you have a building, you can certainly use it. There is an elevator in the building. It has handicap accessibility. So I'm sure we could do something in there. It's a beautiful, beautiful space with those windows. So it probably wouldn't make a good museum because we'd have to cover those windows up.
So is the school library no longer open to the public then?
Right. Just this past year or so, the community library agreement has parted. So the school has a library just for the school, and then the community library is back here in town at a separate location. Yeah. Well, thanks for coming, guys.
How many empty buildings do you think we have?
I said the building on the whole main street, right?
Yeah. How many empty buildings?
Like these that we want to save, just.
I don't know, but it's hard to use a building with a leaky roof.
Yeah.
It really is.
That's the first thing,
I don't have to go count them.
yeah.
I don't know. Do you know?
No, I just think, it seems like we do have a lot of historic buildings, but we've got it, the owners, like those uptown, there's people that own these buildings and they don't keep them up, so they're gonna deteriorate. But I think we need to have a use for them too,
Right. But there's a lot more uses for a building that works
That's right.
than
They
one
gotta
that's
keep 'em
run
up.
down. And I certainly don't mean to say a rundown building is a torn down building, because we don't want to do that. We want to fix it back up. There's no reason to waste a building. These buildings in particular, you cannot replace these buildings for any kind of dollar amount anyone would ever want to look at these days. So tearing them down is throwing money away.
The roof is the most important, it sounds like, right, on a lot of them.
Well, you have to have a good envelope.
Yeah, very true. So it had to have leakage, because from the roof area, you think, to the.
Right, yeah, that was established, yeah.
Definitely, yeah.
I noticed they changed the doors too, on the first building, they had really beautiful.
Weren't
doors.
those gorgeous? Let me see if I can find those. I don't know how to run this back. I'll have to flip through them all. Yeah, I'm glad you saw that because I meant to point that meant to point those out
Yeah, they are.
in the restoration. Let's get those back in there.
Do they still have them, or did they?
I doubt it.
They can be recreated.
They can be remade, exactly, exactly. And the zinc cornice on the top there. Let's put that back on too.
That would be nice.
Has anyone made an estimate of what the total cost of fixing the building would be? Have you ever heard that any place?
I have not.
That conditions assessment from 2019 had about $475,000.
Is that all?
Just to fix the things that were on there
At that time?
at that time. Yeah.
Right, but I mean, honestly, you're gonna pay more than that to tear it down and build, and more than that again to build something else, so.
Right. And it is in the heart, you know, you got the courthouse.
And it won't look like that either, and it won't feel like that,
Was
so.
the post office only in one location, do you know that?
I,
It's always been, you know,
I do know the post office has been in a few locations, but I don't know. I don't have that in my
historical
head right now.
buildings, but,
Yeah. All right. Well, please have another coffee and another piece of bread.